always used to lay you clean up the messes. Down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
Hey, Mike Shimwell here, host of the Shunned podcast. If you want to tell your story, buy a t-shirt, maybe some merch, maybe get some additional resources, you can do so at shunnedpodcast.com. If you want professional help to heal and recover from life in a cult so that you can figure out who you are and what you want out of this life, or maybe you just want to figure out where the patterns from the past might still be showing up in your life today, you can find help at exjwhelp.com. Again, that's exjwhelp.com. And every episode of the Shunned podcast has helpful links in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. So if you need something, you can always look there. And now let's meet our guest.
My name is Catherine. I am 33 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
All right, Catherine. So how did you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place? I know your story is not typical.
Well, the short answer to that is I met someone at work who I dated, and his family was in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and he got me involved in it.
Okay. So how would you have been at that point in your life? So like how many years are we? I know we're not going to skip those years. We'll talk about those years and why they matter to the story, but about how old were you when you first came in contact with the witnesses?
I was in grade 12.
Okay.
So I was 18 years old.
Okay. So wow, that's a big time of life too, right? Probably finishing up school. You're I don't know, in Canada is 18 legal adults like it is in the States? I don't know. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So that's a big time of life.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when you were introduced to it. I guess, would you like to talk a little bit about what was going on leading up to that time of your life?
Yeah. I want to talk about parts of my childhood. My childhood was good up until I was 10 years old. Our family became really dysfunctional. I have 2 older brothers. One is 3 years older than me, and one's 1 year older than me. And my brothers started to abuse me verbally and physically on a daily basis. And my parents didn't discipline the boys for it. There was no trying to resolve it. And I had a lot of trouble coping. Like it hurt my feelings that my parents thought this was acceptable and didn't comfort me or anything, or even just say that they shouldn't be doing that. Like, even if they acknowledged it was wrong, it would have been something. And I wanted to have a close relationship with my mother, but she always rejected me. And I desperately asked for her help with the abuse my brothers were giving me, and she just told me I have to deal with it myself, and that this is what brothers do. And I knew that was wrong. And this went on for about 3 years, and I lived in a rural area, so I had a lot of wilderness around me, and I went to be alone out there. That's the only one place I felt safe. And the other place I felt safe was at my grandmother. She lived next door to us. My grandmother, she was 69 when I was born. So, and she had a problem where she was dizzy all the time. It wasn't vertigo, but it was similar. And it really disabled her. She couldn't have a driver's license. She couldn't do a lot of physical things like normal people her age could do. So she was often just sitting there at home, and I could go and visit her whenever I wanted. So she was very empathetic towards what I was going through. Like I became so close to her. She and I really got along, and she was my mother to me. And this is my mom's mom. So yeah, and but I still strive to try to have a relationship with my own mom. I kept giving her chances, but no, for some reason, I don't know why she continued to distance from me.
She didn't
And
have there was a program she was lacking in her software, so to speak. There was something that a tool or something that it sounds like um, she didn't have.
yeah, and my parents, like, they didn't have a typical marriage. Like, they didn't fight, but like they acted more like roommates. I didn't see them be affectionate. They didn't spend alone time together, you know, which as a kid growing up, I didn't really know what was normal or not.
Sure. So you're just working with whatever is, right? I mean, it's normal to you because this is how you're growing up. You don't have anything to compare it to.
So I spent lots of time too alone in my room. Like, the abuse became so bad that I didn't even feel safe in the house. I didn't feel safe to be in the same room with my brothers. I even had at times to resort to taking a knife out of the drawer to get them away from me. And I was I had bruises all over me. People in public would notice and ask me, like, what happened? And yeah. And kids at school came to know why I was like that. But
So your brothers, did they bully each other or were they just tag teaming on you all the time?
just me.
Wow. I'm
They
so
had
sorry.
this attitude, like it wasn't cool to get along with your sister, and that they obviously had something wrong with them to be such bullies, you know?
Yeah.
And they called me fat piece of crap every day with a tone that wasn't like fun teasing tone. It was serious. And I wasn't fat, you know? I wasn't anywhere near fat. But because they said that to me so often, like as if I deserved to die and I was useless, uh, I came to believe it.
Sure.
And I developed a fear of gaining weight. Like, it was crazy. Um, like, I didn't become anorexic, but it was something along those lines. But we're a very active family. We we all were in hockey and soccer. We played sports year round, but that usually, like, meant we didn't spend any time together on weekends. Our family didn't do things together at all. And
Kind of like every man, woman, and child for themselves.
yeah, we were very dysfunctional and distant family. I I isolated myself because I didn't feel safe. If I was if I wanted to go to the kitchen and have a snack, I'd listen first to see listen from my bedroom door, where is everybody? And I'd wait till I knew they were in another room where they couldn't see me. And if I was in the kitchen and I heard them come out, I'd hide. Yeah.
Yeah, that's uh, clear evidence of a very unsafe home. I mean, it's really sad to not feel, it's really sad, really, really sad to not feel safe in your own home, in your own room. I am glad that you had the woods outdoors or whatever, and I'm glad that you had your grandma next door. That's really, I'm sure it meant the world to you to have somebody who seemed nurturing and caring and who actually saw you as worthy and valid of positive attention and love.
Right. Yeah. If it weren't for her, I don't know if I would be alive.
Understood.
Because, like, as I sat there in my room by myself, I think to to myself, like, I did think at times, if God exists, why is he allowing this? Like, I really thought that. And I thought, well, there must be a good reason for it. And then I thought, okay, how am I going to cope with living in here? And so I thought, well, and I also wanted to get through to my mother how much I was suffering, because she'd see me cry or whatever, and she wouldn't say anything. And
Your dad, was he similar? I mean, was he absent in some way, or did he know that, like, did he see you cry and such? Was he able to connect in any way? It doesn't sound like it, but
he too was very passive.
mm,
Yeah, one time I remember very clearly, the boys were beating me up on the living room floor, and I saw that Dad was standing right nearby, and he didn't do anything.
wow.
I was so mad, felt so unloved and unwanted, are the best words I can describe how I felt.
Was
And
there other violence in your home too?
never between mom and dad. Like, my
Huh.
dad didn't discipline at all. Like, they never sat down and talked to us, had a relationship with us. You know, my dad did at times, but not often enough. Like, my dad was more of a parent than my mom. If he was doing something around the house, he would ask one of us to come help him. He'd show us some things. But overall, he didn't deal with problems in our family. And another thing I thought about when I was trying to cope was, do I have to hurt myself to get through to my mom what what I'm dealing with? I didn't want to do that. Other thing was, oh well, maybe I have to commit suicide for her to get what's going on here? And I couldn't think of a way to commit suicide that for sure would be successful, because I didn't want to hurt myself and then get the same response from my parents. Like, imagine how much more that would hurt my feelings. I
Yeah.
didn't want to put myself there. So I just thought, okay, I'll wait till I'm older and I'll get back at my family. I thought, for one, I'll never forgive my mother. This will be her punishment. And I'll become a cop so I can arrest my brothers, put them in jail.
Aw. I like that. I can totally see that being a kid's fantasy of doing that. I that's you're just looking for power, just looking for attention, just looking for to be seen in a to have someone validate you and understand you. And it just doesn't sound like, I mean, I'm sure the problem wasn't you. The problem was them. Again, they were all missing something here. And uh, that's really sad because they missed out probably on a good kid who was a nice person and they could have had a real relationship with.
I wanted I wanted the ideal family. And another thing too is I thought of, okay, how can I get positive attention from my brothers and my mom? Well, maybe I'll do something kind. So I did. I did some chores around the house without being told, and she thanked me, but didn't get the result I wanted or the attention I wanted. And same with my brothers. Uh,
This just goes to show, not about you.
right.
I mean, the effects are about you, right? I mean, it hurts, but it wasn't somehow a deficiency on your part. I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go into your witness experience as well. But, I work with a lot of people in my coaching practice, and we talk about narcissism a lot, and people often are like, well, what can I do to change the narcissist? How can I make them see me? And you can't. You can't. It's not up to you. It's the narcissist who's missing something, and it's the narcissist who would have to find it. They're in love with their own reflection. They're too busy admiring themselves. They can't see anybody else. They don't. They just don't understand. There's no empathy, no fellow feeling, no ability to take the perspective of another. And it sounds like, honestly, you kind of grew up in a family where everybody was doing their own thing in their own world and they really didn't see each other.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's not your
And
fault.
and because I lacked these basic needs at home, it reflected with my friendships with the girls at school. Like I was kind of grouchy, and whenever I'd hear them say something about their family doing something nice, and I'm like, oh, well, just made me didn't feel good, right? I didn't. Sometimes I said something like, oh, I wish my family was like that, and but I wasn't normal as a kid in that sense when it came to socializing. Uh, so I didn't have social skills, you could say. And I same too with being at home. If I spoke out loud and my brothers were nearby, they would say something mean to me. And so I got to a point where I just didn't talk around them anymore, right?
Yeah, for safety. And I mean, of course, you had no social skills because your parental relationships and your sibling relationships, these are your trial relationships, right? Your starter relationships, the ones where you're taught how to interact with others. And when they're super unsafe, how are you going to be able to go make friends at school because you don't know how to interact in a healthy way? There's not been any modeling for you.
And I couldn't just like relax and have fun and be silly with my
Yeah.
friends like they could. Yeah.
And there's
So
no safety.
exactly, when I turned 11, my grandmother turned 80, and she started saying, like at her birthday and at Christmas time, started saying, well, I might not be here next year for next Christmas or another birthday. And as soon as she started saying that, I started to grieve the thought of her dying. And like surprisingly, she lived another 17 years.
Oh, good for her. And you.
But I spent a good 10 years or more grieving the thought of her dying.
Sure.
So by the time she actually did die, I had already grieved her death, you know? And I was actually ready. I'm like, okay, yes, grandma, you can go. I mean, you've suffered long enough and you've done me so much. Yeah.
Ah, shout out to grandma. It sounds like
Yeah.
she was a real one. She was somebody that was a positive influence in your life. I had a grandfather like that, and so I know how much that can mean to have one person who believes in you and who sees you and who seems to actually like you for who you are. That's an important thing to have in your life.
Yeah. Yes. And so that was, I'd say, when I turned 13, the summer. So this is the summer I was going into grade 8. My parents told us they were separating. And I wasn't upset. They asked us, like, what do you think? And I said, well, what I want you two to be happy. So if this is going to make you happy, sure, separate. And dad moved down the road. He didn't move far away. Um, but in order for my mom to buy out the house to my dad, my they got my grandmother to sell her house, and my grandmother moved in with us at my mom's. I was happy about that. Like, yes,
I
grandma's going to
bet.
live right here with us. And around this time that mom said mom and dad told us they were separating, mom had been away from home more. She was working now full time, whereas before she was a stay-at-home mom. And after work, she wasn't coming home. She wouldn't get home till about 8 o'clock at night. And when she did get home, like me and my grandmother would want to talk to her, but she'd just run and grab the phone and run upstairs into her room. And she also spent more time with her friends. She definitely changed as a person. My mom, she was socializing more. I noticed she was losing weight, and me and my grandmother were concerned. And I remember around that time too, my mom got me hooked up with a therapist. So we had a session with a therapist, and I told the therapist about my mom's negligence at home. And the therapist then told my mom what my concerns were, and my mom didn't want to hear it. She immediately said, we're leaving, Catherine. She didn't want to be told what was wrong, what she was doing wrong. And so dad moved out November of that year. So this was, what year is this? 2004. And my grandmother moved in. And then just 2 or 3 months later, my mom came home with a man that I'd never met before. And she brought him in the house and said he's moving in with us. And like my grandmother was furious. She's like, I'm not living here with this man nobody knows. And there was no getting through to my mom. So sure enough, he moved in, and my grandmother she asked my dad if she could move in with my dad, and he said no. But my uncle, so my grandmother's son, also lived on a property next door to us. So she moved in with my uncle. So then, and because she wanted to stay close to us, she didn't want to be far away from me, and my other brother was close to her too. And but another thing too, when grandma was living with us, she got to see firsthand the abuse my brothers were giving me.
Oh, they didn't stop?
No, they hadn't. They were still doing it.
Okay. I don't know. I think I was wondering if other people were around, would they maybe behave differently? So it had no effect.
Well, yeah, so they didn't, grandma couldn't do anything to stop my brothers. Like, she's 82 years old at this point. And
it would take a physical presence, it sounds like, to stop them.
Exactly. But like, in a way, I had some relief that my grandmother saw this, and she then was, I could tell, was hurt that my parents were allowing the boys to do this to me. So like, I just felt a little bit of justice here, just from her seeing that.
Yeah, it was finally like, you're not the only one who knows. It is a known thing by someone else who actually sees it as wrong.
Yeah. And she tried to talk to my mom about it again. My mom always said, I don't want to hear about it. She always interrupts you. I don't want to hear about it, was her response all the time. And she was even doing it to her own mother. Right. And so this stepdad, he's actually still with my mom. I like him now, and all is good now. And he brought 4 kids with him who are all the same age as me and my brothers. And they didn't live with us, but they still lived with their mom, but they would come over and to be with their dad, right? And they just made themselves at home. And again, I just felt like isolating myself more now that these other kids are here. And of course, I have no choice in the matter. And I just noticed my mom too it was all about my stepdad. She started dressing differently. She very provocatively, and it was disturbing. Like, me and my brothers are used to parents who didn't show affection and stuff, and now my mom is having a romantic relationship with this man, and it was I don't know how to explain what it felt like. It was an adjustment. Yeah.
Oh, I can only imagine. Did the addition of the new kids when they were with you guys, did that change the dynamic at all? Did your
But
brothers act or react any differently, or they start bullying those kids? Or
funny you ask, because my stepdad, he he put his foot down and yelled at my brothers to stop. And they did. It only took the once, and they left me alone. And like
no.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
And
They just
he
had
was
to have an
intimidating.
authority figure tell them to stop.
Like, we had never been yelled at by our dad before. So this was the first time the boys are being yelled at by a man. And right, he also got mad at me once because I was disrespectful to my mom. Like, I had so much resentment toward her, and
Oh, I
so
bet.
I had such a hard time talking to her nicely. And he noticed that, and he's like, you need to show more respect to your mother. And yeah, that's the first time I'd ever been told that. So I thought twice before I spoke from that point on. And it was intimidating to for someone to raise their voice and talk in a way like that. So it affected our family for the good. Yeah.
Somebody
But
came in with us. I mean, it almost I don't know. Makes me think of the book. Maybe this is fair, maybe this is not. That book, Lord of the Flies, just like a bunch of kids who are just kind of left to their own, and it just kind of becomes a survival of the fittest situation. And they just needed some authority. They needed somebody to come in and be like, "What are you all doing here? Like, this is crazy. We gotta, stop. We gotta act differently than this." And it sounds like you all just kind of needed that in your house. You needed somebody to come in and be like, "This is not acceptable. This is not okay. We need some structure here, some expectations."
yeah,
Wow.
but me and my brother's respect for my mom decreased by bringing someone in so soon to our house, and by the way she was behaving and dressing. Um, so okay, so that I was still in grade 8 when he moved in. So we're now in 2005, and I'm graduating grade 8, which is supposed to be like a moment where girls, especially, we get to dress up formally, right? And I got a dress and that, and on graduation day, I I really remember um, that I couldn't smile around my mother, even though I was so excited. I couldn't let me see let her see me look happy. That's much resentment I had toward her. But we went over to my grandmother's at my uncle's to take pictures together, and I embraced my grandmother in those pictures. Like, it's so obvious. I'm like putting the cold shoulder in my mom and putting my arm around my grandmother, and this lasted a while.
Well, yeah,
So
your mom had not earned healthy vulnerability.
so my dad in within a couple years he met a woman, and he he went about it the right way. Like, he brought her to the house for dinner with us, then she went home afterward. And I'd say a year later, but it took a year before she moved in. So we were very comfortable with her, and it was all good. Like, I'm so grateful my dad did that for us. And so I became sort of friends with her. She was different. She didn't have kids of her own, but I still made an effort to be friends with her. Um, I felt she was a little bit judgmental of us kids, And I think that's because she didn't have any herself. And she picked up that we maybe weren't as courteous, and that social etiquette we didn't have. So I think she judged us for that. But let's fast forward now to grade 12. I'm working at a grocery store, and I met David. Another thing I did when I was coping through my life living at my mom's was I got into astrology very heavily. It somehow gave me meaning to my life. I was in it to a point where I got a person's birth date and the time they were born. I created the big chart with all their planets on it. So that was like my hobby. I was considering becoming an astrologer by that time, you know. I was liking it that much. And so when I was working, I was a very quiet person. I didn't have social. I was very shy. Some people mistook my shyness as like being a rude person or something. But
people do that all the time.
Yeah. But David actually talked to me at work, and we had normal conversations, intelligent conversations. And I remember I told him I was into astrology, and he says astrology's for stupid people. And I was like offended. Oh, wow, you just said that to me. And
such tact.
He knew he offended me, and he left, like, to go bring some carts inside. His job was to bag people's groceries while I was the cashier. So he also went and did carts. So he left and did that for 20 minutes, and he came back, and he was flirting with me because he's trying to make up for hurting my feelings. And so we ended up being friends, like, and then we started dating, like, I'd say within 3 months of knowing each other, we started dating.
Can I ask, was he a peer of yours? Was he around your age, or was he?
Yeah, he was 2 years older than me.
Okay.
So he did tell me about his family being Jehovah's Witnesses, but that he himself wasn't one yet. And of course, I'd never heard of them. I'd never spoken to Jehovah's Witnesses before. So I had no idea. Like, my family wasn't religious, so I didn't know anything. And I was so into astrology, though, right? That was my religion, so to speak. He tried to tell me about things in the Bible, and it just went right over my head. Like, it was such a foreign idea what he was talking about. But eventually, I'd say after we'd been dating about 3 months, he said to me, if we're going to keep dating, you need to have a Bible study. I'm like, oh. He's like, yeah, you can have a free Bible study with a woman in our congregation. I'm like, oh, it's free? Because I started going in university after grade 12. I wanted to be a psychologist. So I started my university. I was in university when I started dating him. And just in my first semester, wait, no, sorry, I'm still in grade 12 when this is happening. Yes, we're in 2009. I'm still in my last few months of high school. And so sure enough, I said, yeah, if it's free and it's one-on-one with someone, sure, I'll do that. It'd be an educational opportunity.
Can I ask, did you find it odd at all that he attached that to, like, if you want to keep dating me, you have to do this? Did that in any way at the time? Like, you might have even been excited about the free Bible study because it's an interesting free educational opportunity. But did you find it odd that the relationship hinged on that at all?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
But I didn't understand. But I just went ahead anyway, because I'm getting positive attention from him, right, as my boyfriend. which is something I needed. So I was willing to compromise, right, to maintain our relationship. So yeah, he found he knew he had someone already in mind in his congregation, and she's 3 years older than me. So we went to her place, me and him together, and met her, and we established a weekly thing to go to her house and have a study. We were in that yellow What Does the Bible Really Teach book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that had I think it had just come out. And the other thing that happened at that time was the congregation stopped having the book study at someone's house. So I missed out on that. I never experienced that. And David was coming with me to my Bible studies. And I enjoyed them. I thought it was really interesting. And after a few weeks of studying, the girl conducting my study said she didn't want David coming anymore to our studies. Like, oh, why? She said because he's interrupting the process that's supposed to be happening here, and he's not saying things accurately, teaching you accurately. Like, oh, because between Bible studies, like I was talking to him every day, right? On the phone, especially, like we talk for hours on the phone. And if I had any questions, I would just ask him, right? So, and then
But
when I'd
he's
have my
not teaching you accurately. That's just kind of an interesting phrase. Like he's not following the one cult way. He maybe has some other ideas, or I mean, he's dating you, which he's not supposed to be doing anyway. So, it's kind of interesting.
so yeah, because I would tell her what he told me, and she's like, "Oh, that's not exactly correct." Like I think it was just a little bit off.
Sure.
Yeah, because he all through his high school he didn't practice the religion, so he was out of touch with it a bit. So the other thing was now that I'm studying, I guess the elders told him he should be studying now too to work toward baptism. So he started studying with an elder in the congregation. Yeah, so eventually though he pressured me to come to meetings. I was willing to go to the first meeting, like, okay, I'll check it out. But after the first meeting, I didn't understand anything that was presented, right? So I'm like, well, I'm not getting anything out of this. And I was love bombed there too, right? Which I thought was different. Like I've never been shown so much attention.
I was gonna say, yeah. So it was different. Was it uncomfortable because you weren't used to it, or was it nice because you'd always kind of wanted some positive attention?
At first, it made me uncomfortable because
Okay.
I wasn't used to it. I'm like, you guys don't even know me. Why are you so enthusiastic to see me? um, Another thing interesting too was at the meetings, me and David sat together for the first few, and then the elder said, you guys shouldn't be sitting together. Well, actually, I think my teacher told me that. She's like, you're going to sit with me from now on, and he's going to sit somewhere else. I thought that was weird. I didn't understand the reasoning behind that.
You mean it's
And
not normal to be told that you can't sit next to your boyfriend in church?
right.
What an odd thing to request.
Yeah, I think that's like a general rule, right? In the
Oh, for the
witnesses.
witnesses, yeah, they try to. Well, I mean, especially since neither of you was baptized. But I mean, I remember even just sitting next to, you know, Jenny, my wife today, sitting next to her at the meetings, and it was just like the talk of the Kingdom Hall, and like it was almost scandalous that we sat next to each other, which was just insane. It was so crazy. So yeah, on one hand, they want you to get married immediately. On the other hand, they don't want you to sit next to each other. Like, what?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And before I started studying, he told me, like, he said, my parents can't find out that I'm dating you, right? Because they're witnesses, right? And I didn't understand why, of course, but I went along with it, and we were sneaking around. It was fun sneaking around at his house, and that if his parents weren't there, we went over to his house, and I thought it was fun. But so
No
eventually his
chaperones?
no, not once I started studying, then we started changing our dynamic.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Yeah. And so I got to meet his parents. They seemed all right. So I got to spend time at his house with his family. He has a younger sister, but she wasn't there. I don't know where she was. Uh, but it was so, their family was so different from mine. They would argue. They would sit in the living room together and argue. And I found it so entertaining and amusing. I'm like, wow, it's a family who talks and communicates. Like, even though they're all frustrated and stuff with each other, I'm like, this is awesome. This is better than not talking to each other at all. And I was, of course, super quiet. They barely get a word out of me. They thought that was weird. But I think David explained to them why I was like that. And so once I started studying too, I noticed they were improving their conduct to be a good witness to me, his family. Yeah. Because as you'll see down the story, I'll keep it we'll keep things chronological. But yeah. And so I was still living at my mom's and my dad's. We were 50-50 custody with my parents. And so David would call me and ask me if I'm coming to the meeting. And I remember once I said no, like I wasn't really getting anything out of the meeting. But he pressured me again. Like, I don't remember if he said if we're going to keep dating, you have to come to the meeting, but something along those lines. So I went. You know, what's funny is sometimes we talked on the phone at, like, the meeting's at 7:30 on weeknights. And let's say we talked at 5:30. He said, yeah, I'll meet you at the meeting. And he'd come with usually his mom. And there's times I went and he and his mom never showed up. So I'd call him right after the
Expected you to
meeting.
go. He didn't show up.
Yeah.
Oh, that shows something right there. That's interesting. Okay.
So right away I'd go home and get on the phone and, like, where were you? He's like, oh, my mom drank too much. I guess he didn't have his own vehicle or license. I can't remember. I think he hadn't had his full license yet, so he couldn't come. But I that happened a number of times, and yeah.
Do you find it odd that Jehovah's Witnesses might, quote, drink it too much and not be able to make it to the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Drinking being the one thing that Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll drink.
And, like, I thought it was weird. Like, why would you drink before a meeting? You know, it doesn't make sense.
To be able to go face it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but as I continued studying, I was learning more, right? And then when I'd go to the meeting, slowly I'd recognize some of the things what they said at the meeting was what I learned in my study. So it was very gradual, but yes, slowly I started getting something out of the meeting. And I started reading the Bible every day because I heard them say that at the meeting. They encouraged it, so I did. We were still in the black Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and which was harder to understand, but I made a great effort to read it every day. And the more at the meetings, I was encouraging Bible study in that. I tried to implement what they were saying to do. And eventually the girl who was studying with me wanted to hand me over to an older sister to study with me because she had more time, I guess, and she was more studious than the other sister. So I got handed over to a more elderly sister, and I got along really well with her. I really liked how she went deeper than just what the book presented. And I actually became very studious. It didn't take long before I actually knew more than David. I was correcting him because he didn't study. Almost never did he study. Yeah, for
Isn't that
meetings.
interesting though? Here's a guy who isn't really studying, isn't super into the doctrine, is getting things wrong, but he's still like, but you have to do this thing. Like it's still so vitally important, even though he's not really getting deep into it himself.
Right.
So I have to ask, just because you said that you kind of got passed off from this somewhat younger sister in the congregation to a more elderly sister in the congregation, did in any way that uh did you like that in any way? Like I'm thinking you found comfort in your grandmother, and she was a different type of force in your life, someone older. And obviously you'd always hope that your mom could listen to you. So I guess I wonder, like, going from a peer to maybe somebody older, did uh that make you see it in a different way or take it a little more seriously? Just because of that?
I felt more comfortable with an older person.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, I don't know if it made me take it more seriously or anything, but I think it just made me feel more comfortable.
There you go. Attach to it more, feel more comfortable studying it and being with that person. Because I mean, your teacher there, as you said, who's conducting the study, they're your line, your path to all of this. And you already had the dating thing that was kind of one hook, and now you've got somebody else that you're studying with, and now you have a second hook, because you have somebody that you are comfortable with, which I'm sure meant a lot to you to have somebody you're comfortable with
Yeah,
coming from where you came from.
yeah. And I think too, she had more experience, right, having Bible studies
Hmm.
than the younger sister.
Yeah.
She had overall more knowledge than the younger one. So I liked that too.
So yeah, I'm glad that I'm sure that having somebody that you felt comfortable with made it more easy to attach to this thing that you were studying.
And another part of the reason we switched was the younger one didn't like David. She she came she noticed his attitude and his kind of know-it-allness, and she felt they definitely clashed.
Well, I'm sure
Put
a
it that way.
know-it-allness, as you said, combined with actually being factually incorrect on a lot of the beliefs or whatever, probably led to a lack of respect.
Yeah, because sisters shouldn't be. I know David wasn't baptized yet, but sisters aren't supposed to be correcting men, right?
Mhm.
And it just made her. I think it made her uncomfortable.
Sure.
Yeah, and yeah. So I'm now studying with the elderly sister. So this is 2009. I'd say I started studying in May with the younger sister. I graduated high school. I started university. I was still with the younger sister all of 2009. But by the end of my first semester of university, I had learned enough in the Bible teach book that I was convinced this was the religion to live by. And we had the daily textbook. I had received the daily text for 2010, and I had read the front the front has a little topic they talk about.
Mhm.
And it happened to be about education, saying not pursuing higher education. So I didn't go into, I stopped university after my first semester. And I remember there was a Watchtower meeting in January, and it was all about being part of a spiritual family when you get baptized. And it really appealed to me, like being part of a family, right? I was so desperate for a family. And of course, talking about how Jehovah's love for you will be like superior to the love a parent can offer you. That was huge for me. Like, wow, like I can't go wrong. I can't go wrong if I choose Jehovah. He's going to give me all the love I've been deprived of, and he'll be loyal to me. You know, it brought me a sense of security. And really what I needed was to be parented. And I felt the organization gave me structure and they taught me things my parents should have taught me, like morals, right? So like the more I was learning and going to meetings, I was feeling fulfilled.
I'm sure you were. I think that's what a hook to get into you. You're a person who's looking for family, and they're saying, "Hey, we'll be your family." I mean, back to the love bombing, right? That's part of what makes these groups at times very attractive, is because they are so excited to see you, and they're here. These people are pouring time into you, studying with you, teaching you things, giving you attention, things that you probably always wanted. Of course, it's all about them still, right? Like they're not really asking you who you are and trying to help you to fulfill your life path. They're saying, here's who we are, here's our path, come live it with us.
And like I was still socially inadequate, right? Like people in the congregation would comment on how I don't talk or smile. Yeah, I couldn't. I was still traumatized.
Well, sure.
Yeah, like I didn't feel safe to, because if I smiled or spoke at home, I got hurt, right? Um, yeah, so after that Watchtower, I said to my teacher, the young girl still, I'm like, I want to get baptized. And she's like, whoa, slow down here. She's like, you have to become a publisher first. I'm like, what's that? And so there we start going. She started going over the steps to becoming baptized and everything, and this was all new to me. Like I noticed too, like in the congregation, like there weren't any young ones my age and David's age. We were the only young ones. And of course, I didn't know the whole way the organization is structured and organized, like the elder body and everything. And yet, I found people spoke to me as if I should know these things. Sometimes,
Yes, they do not. Again, the narcissism of Jehovah's Witnesses, the lack of ability to empathize, the not understanding that you don't know everything that they know. They expect you to.
Yeah, and I found it made me uncomfortable. It's like I couldn't respond to them. Like what I should have said to them at times was, well, I don't know that.
Mhm.
But I was just like shocked. But so I did become a publisher shortly after that. I was right into it. I found out about pioneering, and I wanted to do that. And
What
same
attracted
thing.
what attracted you to that, just out of curiosity? At that point, you're studying, you're becoming a publisher, which I'm sure must have sounded again weird. Like, where's that in the Bible? Thou must be a publisher before they can get baptized. Like, that's such a weird organizational corporate thing. But you're on the path to being a publisher. You hear about pioneering and it appealed to you. What was it about it that appealed to you? Do you remember?
Well, I was so convinced what I was learning was true, that the end of the world is imminent. Uh, I was really gung ho with it. Like I really felt the urgency of telling people.
So you wanted to
And
save people.
yeah, big time. Like I was willing to drop everything to do the ministry, which I did. Like, and my mom, what's funny is like before before this, like I wasn't really taking the religion seriously. I didn't really think I was gonna go far with it. I thought it was just something interesting to do at the time. And my mom's like, "Well, you're not gonna go door to door and talk to people." I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That and it turns out I went, I did. I didn't think I was gonna
Many
get
people have said
persuaded.
that and ended up doing that. Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a point in that Bible teach book where I remember they taught that if you don't side with Jehovah, you're siding with Satan. That right there puts you in a spot like,
Mhm.
oh, I have to make a decision now, right?
Mhm. That's a
I
very
remember,
binary way of seeing things, a very black and white way of seeing things, but a very convincing argument, isn't it? Hey, quick announcement here. Uh, some of you don't know, but I have a project dedicated to bringing in career and small business help into our community of survivors. If you'd like to learn more, possibly participate, go to theuprisingproject.com. It's linked in the description here, and read the page about our mission and also the page to join so that you can see the benefits. I'm bringing in resources and support, and you can be a part of lifting others up and finding help for yourself as well. So I hope to see you join in as we all rise up from the ashes of these groups that held us back.
but of course, they present that, well, if you choose Jehovah, he's going to give you a paradise to live in. Life is going to be perfect. And in the meantime, he's going to give you this stuff and whatever else. And
Family.
like, oh, well, sounds like you can't go wrong with choosing Jehovah.
Mhm.
That's totally how I felt. And so David too started publishing. We both started publishing at the same time. We went in the ministry together. He was very critical of me in the ministry. Like it was hard for me to talk in the first place, right? Now talk to strangers at their door about something I'm really not overly knowledgeable about. Like I tried and I was slow to speak. Like that's what they kept telling me is like you need to start talking sooner at the door when people answer. I'm like, oh, because I'm still thinking, and so I found him very critical of me in the ministry, and in turn, I would sometimes criticize him for what he said I was doing wrong, being hypocritical, you know. But but yeah, so now this is 2010, and we keep progressing, and eventually, then we started having Bible studies twice a week with our teachers because we wanted to get baptized, and so we ended up getting baptized in November 2010. So I'd only been studying for a year and a half when I got baptized. And we got married in 2012.
Okay, so still at least a year and a half or so, probably, depending on when it was in 2012.
Yeah, a year and a half. And in in January of 2011, my dad told me he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer.
Mm.
And so I'm 20 years old when he told me that. I just turned 20, and I didn't know what stage 4 cancer meant. So I just asked him, I'm like, I could tell it was serious based on his tone. And I'm like, are you going to die? And he's like, I don't know. And so like, he assured me and my brothers though that he's gonna try and get better, right? Like I had no knowledge about cancer really, because I'm 20 years old, right?
Sure.
And we're still at a time period where the internet isn't so broadly used like it is now. Same with cell phones were just taking off, like smartphones and stuff, right? So I didn't even go to the internet and look up what stage 4 lung cancer was. So I just had to, I didn't know what to expect. So I just continued on. I did go to college. My mom made me go to college. She chose for me to take office administration. I had
So
no.
you got away from psychology.
Well, yeah, because there's no way I was going to university anymore with this religion. I didn't want to do any schooling actually, because I felt the end was that close. I'm like, there's
Oh
no
yeah,
point.
yeah. I get it. It's just so it's like you're right at the precipice. You're about to go to school for psychology. My guess is that doing so would have put you on a different path and could have been the antidote to what you were learning to some degree, or at least helped you to see some things. And it's just it's sad that they got you away from that right when you were about to go. And now you're just going to do business administration. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just that for your life at that point, psychology probably would have been so much more helpful.
But the needs that the religion was meeting for me
Yeah,
was superior to anything
sure.
else. Like, and my mom tried to stop me from participating with the witnesses. My dad, not so much. He was just neutral about it. But my grandmother, she was dead against me being a Jehovah's Witness. She said she'd rather me be a prostitute.
Wow.
Yeah, but
Wow,
she
grandma.
didn't give any reason. Like I
Yeah,
asked,
now
like,
I'm like, what
why?
was grandma's background?
Well, she was raised Salvation Army, but she didn't practice. She hadn't practiced it for a long time. So, like, that's the thing is when my mom, my grandmother, so strongly discouraged me. They didn't give any reasons, not strong enough reasons. And I said to mom, well, you study the Bible teach book and you give me reasons out of this. What's wrong with it? You know? But she didn't want to do that. So I didn't want to get married before I was done college. So I waited till I was graduating college in April of 2012. And we had already set the date in May. But it was earlier that year, David wasn't working. He hadn't been working for a while. And I said, I don't want to marry you if you're not working. And I had the elder support on that. There were definitely times with my relationship with David, especially deciding whether to marry him, that I wanted the elders to help me decide. Because I didn't have nobody, my parents, my family didn't like David off the hop. My family didn't like him. They didn't want me to marry him. But again, I asked why, and they didn't give a good reason because they never got to know him, right? And I wanted the elders, at least one of them, to treat me like I was their daughter in this case. Like I wanted to say to them, well, if I was your daughter, what would you tell me? And none of them would make any sort of comment toward that. They all stayed very neutral about it. Because like I kind of just put my family to the side. Wasn't close to them. They didn't really do anything for me, so I didn't really regard their opinion highly at all. And they didn't know what the witnesses were all about either, right? I was now following this new lifestyle, and they knew nothing of what was involved with it. So right after I said we're postponing our wedding till you get work, he got work within 2 weeks. Yeah. So we made another date in July 2012. And so my dad was treating his cancer still. I'd visit him once a week to see how he was. And it was always up and down. Sometimes his tumor shrunk and sometimes it wasn't. And I don't know, I didn't feel his wife, they weren't married, but they're common law. His wife was very clear at times. And I remember one time my mom said to my brother that your dad might die, because my dad and his wife tried to make light of his cancer. He didn't want us to stop our plans and our life to sit and watch him get treatment, right? And
yeah, it's also probably how he got through it, was by not looking at it at a heavy perspective.
Yeah. And I remember my brother ran over to my dad's house, like in panic at the thought, like dad might die. And my dad answered the door and he said to my brother, like, he's like, no, don't worry about it. Go back to your mom's. And one time too, I started to ask dad, if you die, he stopped me right there and said, we don't talk about that. Yeah, so I think I tried to rely more on his wife for information, since she was the one taking care of him. But I don't think she was always honest about it. Because I don't think she wanted us there taking up her time with my dad. I think she wanted him to herself. So it's 2012 still. We got married. Me and David had a mishap that got us in trouble. What is it called? Private
reproof.
Yes. We got private reproof. We couldn't comment at the meetings. We couldn't get married at the Kingdom Hall. So we got married in the backyard at his parents' house, which I was happy about. We only had 50 people. It was wonderful, I thought.
Honestly, that's probably more an intimate, nice gathering than in a Kingdom Hall.
Yeah.
As someone who was married in a Kingdom Hall, I'd rather been married in a backyard. Yes.
And I remember one sister telling me, like, she didn't know like what the reproof was for, but she knew we weren't getting married at the hall. And she said, she's an older sister, and she's like, Jehovah does not bless your marriage if you don't get married at the Kingdom Hall. She said, all the marriages that have failed were not married at the Kingdom Hall.
Oh, wow. What a bunch of garbage. That is not true at all. Many of them fail. Many of them fail. Just in general, because you're not prepared to be married.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I was shocked to hear her say that to me.
Wow, what an encouraging thing. Like, who says that to somebody? Who goes out to a new bride and is like, yeah, you're screwed. There's no way this is going to work.
And some people in the congregation who we were out in service with all the time, like, the same people go out in service every day, right? And they told me in an indirect way that marrying David isn't a good idea. So everybody was telling me not to marry him, but and I saw some red flags, yes. And eventually at one point the elders did tell us, okay, you guys either break up or get married. You guys have been dating 3.5 years now. You have to make a decision, which is really what made us get married, was that pressure. Because I would have dated him longer if it weren't for that. And like I was still living at mom's, right, before we were married, and I was desperate to get out of that house.
Oh, I bet.
So
A lot of
the
people
thought
get married as young Jehovah's Witnesses because they're desperate to get out of a house.
yeah. So just the thought that, well, if I don't marry him, I'm stuck here still. Uh, I don't think I could handle it anymore. And so that was a big thing. And also my plan to pioneer, David said he had the same goal to pioneer. And I said, I want us to go where the need's greater too, wherever that is. Like, and he was on board with that too. We were both auxiliary pioneers. I did become a regular auxiliary, but he didn't. So to me, like, that pioneering was a huge priority to me. And I wanted a husband that would do it with me. Like, that was partly the most important thing at that time for me. So David was willing to do that, and it got me out of mom's house. So I decided to marry him. So July 2012, we got married. And then a month later, my dad passed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It ruined the fun of getting newly married. And what's crazy too is up to that point he died, like, his wife was still telling us that he's going to be okay. Like, my dad's not going to die.
Oh, she
Like,
may
I
have
felt
been very, very much in denial herself.
very, very true. But
Oh,
like at the same time, I felt misled. Me and my brothers felt misled.
sure. Yeah. Cost you opportunities.
Yeah. But at least he got to be there when I got married. And me and David chose the elder we wanted to do the talk for our wedding ceremony. And my family was not impressed. The elder, he didn't sound very prepared, and his illustrations were poor too. Like, it did not give a good witness to my family, his wedding talk he gave. Yeah. So my husband too, he's now my husband, right, David, at this point that dad dies.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not empathetic at all. It really astonished me that someone could not be empathetic. That I'm 21 years old and my dad just died. Like, he actually said bad things about my dad to me at this point.
Almost like it was better that he was gone
I
because he
don't
was
know.
bad in some way.
My dad was fine. I don't know why. David had a narcissist problem, is what.
I'm sure, yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like, was David, was it was his backwards way of empathy, uh, trying to almost diminish your dad and his value in your life, as though, well, then maybe it doesn't have to hurt so bad. Is that like the type of empathy he was trying to met out?
I have no idea. I
Okay,
can't make any sense of it.
okay,
But
that's what narcissists will do sometimes. So I was wondering.
but like, I the night dad died, I told both those sisters who studied with me. Um, he told the elder that was studying with him And nobody called me. Like, nobody came and saw me. Like, I wasn't out in service those days afterward. Like, he died on a Wednesday night, which was a meeting night. So I'd missed the meeting because of that. And his funeral was the following Sunday. So I was nowhere to be seen for Wednesday to Sunday. And I did get some cards, and some people sent flowers. Some who didn't know me very well at all sent the flowers. I'd say sending those flowers was very comforting. I don't know why, but for someone who lost, sending flowers I encourage. But I was still a bit surprised no more people hadn't reached out to me to give their condolences. So I did listen on the phone to the meeting on Sunday, and the elder did announce that about my dad's passing, and that the funeral is that day at such and such a place and time. And then surprisingly, like, some of the congregation came to my dad's funeral. When my dad was going through cancer treatment, he resorted to faith healing.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. So I got to share with him my Bible knowledge against what he was being taught by this faith healing church. And it's because it's funny, like, he actually asked me questions about what he was learning there. Like, he was being taught these doctrines that witnesses do not believe in at all, and that are not biblical. So I got to tell almost every time I answered him was that it's not biblical. And I got to show him sometimes how scriptures they were using were being not used right. So that was an interesting topic me and Dad got to have together. And I told him straight out once, I'm like, Dad, what you're being taught is not true. You're being brainwashed.
It's so rich. But I get it. That's what, we were all there at one point. So yes.
And surprisingly, he said back, he said, I know. So he was just doing it to give himself hope.
Yeah, he was clearly just trying to feel better.
Yeah. So the funeral for Dad was done by the minister of this faith healing church. So, of course, as a witness, I didn't like that. I sat there and participated in the funeral just out of respect. Like the witnesses didn't stay for the funeral. They just came beforehand and gave their condolences to me and left. But David sat with me, and actually one sister in the congregation did stay as well. And the funeral didn't come. It was the talk by the minister was terrible. Like, even from non-witness perspectives, it put us down. It basically said we were holding Dad back from going to heaven and dying and going to heaven.
It says when you say we were holding him back from going to heaven, you mean like we as Jehovah's Witnesses, or we kids, or
like us as a family,
everyone who is there?
Like the family mainly, like as if us trying to keep him alive was bad.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right.
Like, this was the worst funeral I've ever been to. Like, and I wrote a letter to my brothers telling them, like, this is not what the Bible teaches. This and I gave them the little brochure, the trifold kind of ones. There was one with a nice picture on it.
Like what happens to loved ones when they die or
Yeah,
something
it was
like
the
that?
old tracks though. It wasn't the newer long ones.
Right.
So
The small.
I gave them each one of those with my card that I wrote. And one of my brothers actually did read it. Because I knew he was the most upset of the three of us about dad. So I used my opportunities to give a witness to my family when I felt it was appropriate.
Mhm.
Uh, Otherwise, I didn't talk to them about it. Yeah, and um, yeah, so me and David's marriage went on. He was very abusive, uh, very argumentative. Like I was always doing something wrong. I was never right. Even said some really like he. It seemed like raising his voice and yelling was something that came really easy to him. Where in my family that we never yelled or did that. We didn't argue either. Like we
I was
just
gonna say, it
didn't
sounds like
talk
you've
to.
gone from one extreme to the other. One extreme unhealthy, this negligent home where no one's speaking up. And then this other one where it's micromanaged and it's always your fault. You're being blamed for everything.
Yeah, but like at the same time, I was just glad to someone to be talking to me that I
Sure.
live with. You know, um, and before we got married, we did family study together, which is what the elders said we had to do. We studied the family book, and I loved that family book. Like all the whole time we studied it, I was comparing it to my family and thinking, wow, my family did none of these things the book encourages families to do, right? And what makes a loving family. Like, so that was a lot for me to process. Like, but I loved the book. I'm like, wow, this is like a guide to how to have a happy family. It really appealed to me,
Mhm.
and I thought, like, I wanted to be the best wife I could be, not only to be happy, but to please Jehovah. And I thought David was on the same page with that, but apparently not. He was an oppressive husband. He stopped doing family study once we got married. He didn't want to study with me at all. I loved studying for the meetings and that, and he had no interest anymore. And he even stopped going out in service as often. It was dwindling. And
He kind of went back to who he was before he married you.
right. And I was so disappointed. Like I felt so let down. I'm like, you said before we got married that you wanted to pioneer with me and we'd go to where there was a need. He's like, oh, well, I changed my mind. Yeah. So I'm like, wow, I would not have married you had I known you were going to do this. So, so right away, like our marriage was strained. Like,
Actually, let me back that up for just a second. Had I known you were gonna be like this, I wouldn't have married you or whatever. What was upsetting you primarily? Was it the way he treated you, or was it that he wasn't gonna do these witness things?
the witness things.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Like we're taught almost to accept and take the abuse, but if the person's not going to serve Jehovah fully, well, now we've got a problem.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that that's what these marriages are really based on, because honestly, let's say he wasn't being abusive and he was, and let's say he was a nice guy, and treated you well, he just wasn't into the witness thing. That would be really sad that you would be like, well, I don't want to have a relationship with you because you're not pioneering. Like that, then it would be kind of monstrous in a way. Like, oh, you're a terrible person because you won't pioneer. But it's funny the ways they make us see relationships and what really matters and counts in those relationships.
Yeah. Like, for sure, the witnessing and pioneer work was the most important to me. And the other thing I noticed was that when women have a husband who's pioneering as well, they seem to get further in the organization than I would a single sister pioneering. So that was another little part of it too. He also uh, stopped working as much. He worked less. He was just making enough. Like, I was working too. Like, I worked part-time, but he no longer was pioneering or auxiliary. Like, so in that, his parents said, like, well, if you're not going to pioneer, you have to have a full-time job. That's was kind of the rule. And but he just sat at home most of the day and played video games, watched YouTube or whatever. Very lazy.
A lot of witness guys like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like very untidy, unkept, didn't have good hygiene. He only showered for the meeting and shaved for the meeting.
Depressed and checked out.
And yeah, I was really thrown back by the pretense he put on before we were married.
Mhm.
But I was determined to be a good wife. I exerted a lot of pressure on myself to behave the way we're told to behave.
Because there's
You
going
know?
to be a good outcome and a reward if you behave that way, right?
Right. And the elders knew what he was like, and they were basically on my side of things, right? But there was some times I went to them once or about his abuse, and of course they had nothing constructive to tell me. They just said, "Oh, well, just keep doing what you're doing." That's all they had to say, and I was really disappointed they didn't have anything to say. It's kind of like when my mom didn't even say like what the treatment I was getting was wrong, even if the elders had said that. So that was very similar. The way the elders responded to the way my mom responded to my abuse I was given.
Very neutral, I believe, is the way you described it earlier. Just not really. Sounds like just absolving themselves of any responsibility to give you anything and just backing away and being like, well, that's your problem.
Right. Yeah. And I eventually got to go to Pioneer School for the first time. That was a good experience. Like, I felt Jehovah's love even more after that for me. That was ultimately my motivating force, is that I was feeling loved by Jehovah. So I'll go to 5 years into our marriage. We were having the convention in Toronto this year. It was a special convention for the summer. And David was inactive by this time. He wasn't ever going, he maybe went to an assembly. Usually he'd go to assemblies, but he wouldn't go to meetings or zero service for years by that time. And he distanced what, oh, okay, I'm skipping ahead. During, okay, so we got married in 2012. I'd say in 2016 or 17, a sister moved into our congregation who was newly reinstated. And me and her hit it off. She was like 15 years older than me. And she wasn't married. She actually just got divorced. And she was telling me about what she went through with her ex-husband, that he was a truck driver. And when he was out on the road, he would have hookers. And she knew this was going on, but she didn't have evidence. And her husband denied it to the elders. So nothing was done. And eventually, though, she did find evidence through his email so that she showed the elders, but the elders still didn't do anything about her husband. So eventually she ended up committing adultery to get out of the marriage. I thought that was an interesting story. So
happens a lot.
And she told me about her upbringing, that she too wasn't raised in the truth. Her mom got the truth first, and their stepdad was abusing them sexually and other things, very bad. And her mom denied it. Her mom never dealt with it, just like my mom never dealt with my family life. So we had these things in common. And I, of course, was telling her about what my husband's like, how he treats me. And she was the first person to come out and tell me that the way he's treating me is abuse. The word abuse, I hadn't heard it called before. So I looked into it more. Actually, another sister in the congregation who was familiar with his family was telling me some of their history and just basically how dysfunctional of a family they've been. And it's true, like they're dysfunctional in a totally different way than my family. They're dysfunctional in the way like they never followed the witness structure for headship, and the husband and his dad and mom never followed those roles, so they were always fighting with each other a lot. David got exposed to fighting by his parents all through his childhood, and I think that's why he was so predisposed to dealing with our marriage that way. And so the sister told me to read a book about coercive control. And I did.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I read it and I'm like, wow, this is exactly what's going on in my marriage.
And other places, but yes, in the marriage.
And the sister I'd become newly friends with, she was very supportive of me. And I told her, like, but she actually suggested we separate, me and my husband. And I thought, though, but if I separate, I can't pioneer because I don't have the grounds for separation. And I actually wrote to Bethel about these grounds for separation. And I wrote, well, what about emotional abuse? Why isn't that grounds for separation? And they just responded, well, just refer to the book. They basically didn't give me an answer. I told them how oppressed I felt by my husband because he was just so bad, just tried to put me down all the time, told me I was a bad wife all the time, and it was nuts. Like, so I didn't get any real answers from Bethel. So after reading this, like David, somehow he found out that this sister was encouraging us to separate. I hadn't told him anything at this point. And so I didn't know how he knew this. He's like, I want you to stop associating with her. He often did that. He tried to control who I associate with. I'm like, oh, I didn't say anything because she was the first sister to actually be helping me with my marriage to some extent. And yeah, I didn't want to separate because I'd lose my pioneering. And after I read this book, I had the courage to say to David, like, you are manipulative, controlling, and abusive. I said that to him very calmly. And like a switch went off inside of him. And he suddenly withdrew from me completely. He stopped talking to me, and
He shunned you.
yeah, he knew that this sister was somewhat the source of me coming to this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the book, really. The book helped me to tell me how to end the cycle of abuse, and it worked. And not long after that, he didn't talk to me for like 3 weeks. And this Toronto convention was about to start, and we were, from where we lived, we were going to take the train to Toronto. So he was supposed to come with me. He said he was going to. And the day before the Friday, it starts on a Friday, right? So on Thursday, he spoke to me again for the first time and said that he's seeing someone. He's going out with someone else. I'm like, oh, who is this? And it was actually his best friend's girlfriend. He was good friends with this guy who wasn't a witness, which I knew about. But so I was kind of shocked for him to tell me he's seeing someone else. He did come to the convention with me all 3 days. But of course, it was weird. Like, he was texting her right when we were sitting right beside each other at the convention. I'm like, can you stop texting her at this time? And he didn't. And something too about these conventions, and like, they had started coming out with videos now during the convention and the meetings. This was still kind of a new thing. I noticed in these videos, whenever a witness was having a hardship, they had family to back them up and support them. And of course, I had no family in the truth. His parents were not ideal models of witnesses. So I couldn't go to them. They weren't
You're supposed to
spiritual.
have this spiritual family, though.
Yeah, that's what thought I was getting into too. But they definitely weren't as spiritual as most witnesses are. So like, watching these videos where the witness always had their family to back them up and support them made me feel worthless, because I didn't have that, right? And I was struggling.
Yeah, and really,
You know?
most Jehovah's Witnesses don't have that. Most witness families are not very tight, really.
Yeah. So these videos were
Well,
kind
they make a
of,
lot of people feel bad.
and too, like, in my journey as a witness, I would see other families, right, in the congregation at the assemblies, and I would compare it to my family, of course, and I'd be jealous. I was so jealous when I saw a family that looked happy. Like, wow, I would do anything to have that.
It's hard, isn't it? The sad thing is that you see all these families and you think they're happy. And I'm not going to say that there's no happiness in Jehovah's Witness families. Certainly there can be happy times, but as far as real happiness, no, because nobody can be who they really are. Everybody's just playing a role. It's all fake at
And
the
I
end of the
didn't
day.
know that, right?
Yeah, and you're not going to know. So you just think, oh, look at how wonderful this is. But man, just looking back, there's so many families, including, well, I don't know. I think anybody who really knew my family knew what was up. But I think that people who didn't probably thought we were some happy family or something, and we're miserable. And I think there were a lot of families that I know I thought were really happy, and then I found out all kinds of stuff that was going on in their families. They're just so good at appearing. They're great at giving the appearance of something, but that can make your heart hurt when it's something that you really want.
Yeah.
Salt and
And yeah. Um, so David did tell me that he would let me know if he committed adultery.
That's awful kind of him. Come on, man. You're sitting next to your wife at a convention, texting your girlfriend, like, or your buddy's girlfriend. I mean, like, even that, what the heck? Like,
Yes.
how do you feel about your buddy as well? Like, man, he just didn't care. He was just gonna do what he was gonna do and whatever. All right.
Yeah. So he didn't have a relationship with me anymore, but I still was living with him. Like I didn't have grounds for separation still. Like, even though your husband's seeing another woman, that's not grounds for separation, right?
That's so crazy. That's so crazy.
So I had a hard time with it, like continuing to live with him, even when he acted like I was invisible. He'd be gone. I knew where he was because I could tell he took a shower. So obviously he's out with her. So time went on. I decided to take a course to become a transcriptionist for the court because I could work and live anywhere in the world. I could do that job from anywhere. So the whole idea was I could move and pioneer somewhere else and have a job, right? So I took that course, and so this is in 2018 now. So we've been married almost 6 years. And one time he came home at night and he fell asleep with his cell phone unlocked beside him. And I saw that, and I grabbed his phone quietly and I looked at what he was saying to her. Last thing he said, and the last thing he told her was, "We should have had sex." And I that's all I read. And that was enough. Like, that was enough for my brain to process. And I put the phone back beside him and I'm like, whoa, like, what's going on? And I waited till the next day, and I said to him, I said, "If you commit adultery, are you going to tell me?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, what was this message you gave her then?" It's like, "Oh, that I was joking." Okay, you're not ready to admit it yet.
He's gaslighting.
Yeah. And not long after that, he went to work and he left his laptop unlocked. Normally he's got these big complicated passwords. He's one of those he's very good with computers, very technical. So he had these very complicated passwords. No way would I know them or remember them. And so he left his computer unlocked. I'm like, wow, this is an opportunity. I'm going to, again, check his messages with this girl. And yeah, sure enough, there was lots of evidence on there that he had committed adultery. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing. Like, not because our marriage was over, but because he lied to me. There's evidence months back that he was sleeping with her. And I called my friend, and she helped me to save those messages and send them to myself as evidence and everything. And I went straight. There was an elder that lived 2 doors down. I showed it to him, and yeah, so now the elders were going to be involved now. That same day, David came home from work, and I told him what I found. Actually, I told his mom already, and his mom texted him and said, "What? You're an idiot. Look what you've done, blah, blah, blah." And so he came home already knowing that I knew, and he admitted it at that point. He's like, "Yeah, I didn't want to tell you because you were doing your course and I didn't want to stress you out." I'm like, well, it stressed me out knowing you were lying to me. And how was I going to prove it? That's what was stressing me. No.
He's a hero, Catherine. He's a hero. He wasn't, he wanted to help you. He was helping you out.
Yeah, well, that's how he came out. He's like, oh, I knew you weren't happy in the marriage, so I made a way out for you. Yeah.
Man of metal.
And I said later that if really that was your intent, you would have told me right off the hop when you committed adultery.
If you want to leave, just leave. You don't have to drag somebody on and sit next to them, texting someone and hurting them and all of that. If you want to do, if you need to leave and you want to leave, the honorable way is to do so in a kind way and to move on with your life. But you don't have to not to hurt other people in the process and withhold things. And wow, but he's uh, well. Anyway, I'm sorry that that happened to you. You didn't deserve to be treated that way.
Uh, my friend there, she's the only person I was really friends with that helped me through this. And she always said, you can always come stay with me. You have a place to go if you need a place to go. And she was the only witness who ever said that to me. And she actually, so this is still the year 2018. The adultery was official in April 2018. And in February 2018, my friend had moved north, about 500 kilometers north from where we were, to a small town called Kirkland Lake. It's the name of the town. And like, I'd never been north that far. Most people who live in southern Ontario don't go more than 200 kilometers north of southern Ontario. Most people don't know what's up there in the rest of Ontario. It's funny.
We don't know what's up there.
Yeah, it's like they're so consumed by southern Ontario that they forget about the rest. And so now I'm faced with, okay, I need to find somewhere else to live. I'm not going to move back in with my mom. My friend she still said I can come up and live with her. And she was newly married at this point too. She married a guy who wasn't baptized, who he was still studying. But yeah, so I felt that was my best option, to go move up with her. And of course, people in the congregation gave their 2 cents about it. They actually discouraged me from doing that. They said it's not a good idea for a single person to move in with a couple. And of course, the reason is you might end up having an affair with the husband. Like, yeah, right. This is ridiculous. Like, I have nowhere to go here. She's offering me somewhere to stay. And I'm not going to turn it down out of the possibility I might have an affair with her new husband. Like, this is so
It's
obscure.
like you have no ability to choose who you're even attracted to. And it's also, or like no moral compass as far as like what you would do. But also, were these people who had big opinions on where you should go, were they opening their doors to you?
No, that's
Isn't
the
that
whole thing.
interesting?
Yes.
Got big ideas about what you need to do, but none of them are trying to actually help you execute those ideas and stay put and opening their homes to you.
And what's interesting too is when they were saying that to me, we had just had a Watchtower study that Sunday about showing hospitality. And the Watchtower was directly talking about what my friend is doing for me. She's directly following that watchtower, and other people couldn't see that. And what's interesting too is I had a Bible study when I was still married, and the woman left her husband in order to become a witness. And I was studying with her, and like I had no room for her to stay with me. She had nowhere to go because she was leaving her husband for the truth. And so I told the elders and some people in my congregation, I'm like, she's been in an abusive relationship with this husband, and she's leaving because she wants to pursue being a witness. She needs somewhere to go. Can someone help her out? Nobody did. I'm like, wow, this goes right against what we teach. I was astonished. That's
If the
one.
end's truly coming tomorrow, then
Yeah.
shouldn't you all rally around each other and help each other as much as possible to help save as many as you can,
Yeah.
since the end is clearly coming tomorrow, always?
Yeah, like the people in this congregation were well off. They were not poor by any means.
Where's the urgency?
Yeah, or just the loving family they claim to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was like one check against them in my books. She ended up having to go to a shelter, a women's shelter, and she had a daughter too. I was so embarrassed. Like, no one should have to go to a shelter when you're coming to meetings and you're affiliating with our organization. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not what it purports to be, is it?
Yeah. That I found that very disturbing. That nobody wanted to extend hospitality to her. Yeah, so I did move to Kirkland Lake in with my friend. And she had told me about the congregation being different from when we were in before. She's like, oh yeah, the people in this congregation are behind in everything, and they don't follow things as closely as we do down here. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And she's like, oh yeah, there's a great need too for publishers. The ministry, the territories aren't getting covered nearly enough. So again, that was another reason I wanted to go there, because they needed publishers. But the girls in my congregation still didn't feel that was a good enough reason to go, because that was my goal from day one, was to go where there's a need. I'm like, wow, I'm finally able to do this. I'm free from my marriage, my husband who's holding me back.
Mm-hmm.
So I went anyway. And yet the congregation was very loving to me. Like, they're very different. Like my friend had said, these are elderly people. They're poor, and yet there's no cliques. They're just more down to earth. And they were just so happy to have a new publisher and a pioneer in the congregation. So again, I was love bombed. But it was good. It wasn't phony. It wasn't as phony as the other congregation. Another thing too with, yeah.
How were you going to this congregation as a pioneer?
Well, I didn't lose my pioneering because of his adultery. Like,
okay, so at this point, you guys had he had been disfellowshipped, I guess, and
well, I'll tell you, he admitted it, of course, to me that he
right.
made adultery. But when the elders had my evidence, they said, we can't go by this because he could come back and say you forged all this. And there was no way I could have forged all that. Like, and there was pictures too, like sexual images. And I was very disappointed they didn't use that evidence. They're like, we need him to admit to us that he did it, or he has to admit it to someone else who's then a witness. And I don't know if he admitted it to his mom, but the elders went after his mom to say, did he tell you he committed adultery? Because if he did, this counts. Now we can proceed. And
That's
she,
two witnesses, but actual written and photographic evidence does not count. They would rather have hearsay from a second individual than actual factual evidence. Boy, if that isn't just a microcosm of what it is to be in the truth, to value what just a bunch of people say instead of actual facts. I don't know what is. So there,
right,
yeah, there you go. That's how they derive their truth.
yes. And it's funny though, his mom stood behind him. She would not admit to the elders. And okay, so the elders now had to try to talk to David. They didn't try calling him for some reason. They tried to catch him outside on the property and talk to him face to face, but that didn't work. So eventually the elders, like within a couple weeks, told me, like, if we don't get this out of David, you're not gonna be allowed to pioneer anymore. I'm like, what? How come for something he did I will get punished for? Like, this makes no sense at all. Like,
And what
so
was
I
their reasoning?
just that it looks bad. Looks bad, I guess, that I'm accusing him of something, and I don't.
It looks bad. Again, they care about appearance over substance, don't they?
Or like, because to be a pioneer, you have to be exemplary and
Here.
be a good example. So if I guess the state of my marriage was not a good example at this point. So I went home and told David, like, that the elders said that to me. And he's like, that's stupid. And so he wrote a letter to the elders and said that he committed adultery. So that was good. But
Good for
then,
him for owning up to it and setting you free.
yeah. And then now the next step was they wanted to disfellowship him. And he again avoided the elders about that. And then he did disassociate through a letter again. Yeah.
And so he left. So that's how you were able to move up to like Kirkland Lake or Kirkwood Lake, and
Like,
that's how you were able to go up there and pioneer, because he owned all of it there at the end, and so they didn't therefore take that away from you.
right. Like, because I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and it's sad that even that, like, if he hadn't have done that, they would have basically acted like you were somehow in the wrong. Like, well, I mean, you probably contributed to the reason that he was out there doing what he was doing, or, I mean, surely you're to blame at least a little bit. Again, in that blame game where you then can't continue on in some capacity because it looks bad.
Actually, the elders uh, viewed me favorably. Uh, they they knew his family and him were messed up.
But not favorably enough to have allowed you to continue had he not owned it.
I guess it's written in their elders book or something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm in the Kirkland Lake congregation now. And yeah, it's true. The territory wasn't being done enough. And I noticed the people in the territory were a lot more responsive than they were down in the city. Like, almost everybody you spoke to, you'd get a conversation with. So that was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just found the congregation more humble people. And but I was still quiet. Like I hadn't fully come out of my shell yet. One sister happened to notice. She actually had taken a course with counseling and stuff. So she had some insight when she observed my behavior and stuff. She said she could tell right away that I was abused. So I needed to get, I did start the transcription, but I wasn't getting enough work to support myself. So I got a cleaning job. I got some offices to clean in Kirkland Lake. So in total, I lived with my friend for 8 months before I could get my own place. And the other thing was, it was a lot cheaper to rent in Kirkland Lake than in Barrie, is where I was before. There was no way I would be able to live alone in Barrie. Like, the cost of living was just crazy. So through going out in service in Kirkland Lake, I got to know the people who were in service all the time. And my friend told me that one of these sisters just got reinstated before you moved in. I'm like, oh yeah. And she's very zealous, like in the ministry. Like, she was just as zealous as I was. And we were out together a lot. I finally met someone who was as zealous in the ministry as I was, because I felt other people before were just, I don't know, just kind of doing it. I don't know. They weren't as
They're
eager
going through
to
the
find people.
motions.
Yeah. It was more of a social thing,
Mhm.
going out in service, than actually preaching. So, and that really frustrated me before, because I was taking the preaching seriously. So me and the sister hit it off. She's actually, the sister is the same age as my parents, and she actually went to high school with my parents unknowingly. Yeah.
Oh wow,
And
small world. That's kind of
yeah,
cool.
I told my mom, and my mom looked in the yearbook, and she was in the same homeroom class as my dad in grade 12. So that was interesting. And so we ended up getting an apartment together, me and the sister. And like, just like everybody, when you live with someone, you get to know their weaknesses. And I noticed that she was more extreme about studying and everything, about in the ministry, than I was. I thought I was extreme, but she was even more. Like, she was so strict with herself, like unbalanced. And I noticed too, she was physically tense a lot. And I could tell she wasn't happy, and that she actually was really insecure. And she didn't come out and tell me this, but I concluded that it was her upbringing. She was not loved by her parents either. And the truth for her was the same motivation as mine. She just wanted love. She was desperate to be loved, and she had a family. Like, she had gotten married. Again, her, just like me, her husband was abusive. She ended up having 4 kids with him. 3 of them were disfellowshipped. So she only had 1 daughter that she talked to. And I'm like, how do you do it? How do you not talk to your kids? And it made her emotional when I asked that, of course. So we had some things I could, just from my own insight, I gathered these things. But I don't know, her tenseness made me uncomfortable.
Just like, was it
Like,
a palpable feeling when you walked into the room, pretty much.
Yeah, and she said it herself. She's like, I just catch myself clenching my fists, and she doesn't realize she's doing it, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's cortisol is the hormone that causes that. And she was treating it though. She was trying to get better. But she was also just a perfectionist, I found. And she wanted
Like
the
many
elders.
Jehovah's.
She highly esteemed the elders so much that she would always be looking for their approval. And that's nothing. I never did that. I didn't need the elders' approval. Like Jehovah is supposed to be able to read my heart and know me and my intentions. So I don't need any human's approval. Where she did, and same with like the elders' wives. She held them in such high esteem too. Like she took their word over any other sister. I could tell her the same thing, but it wasn't valid unless a elder's wife told her. And that bothered me too. But in the meantime, while I'm living with her, I became friends with Sister C, I'll call her. And she wasn't very active. She was not regular at meetings. She didn't go out in service. I was basically starting out there to encourage her more to be more active, like indirectly. Like I'm not going to come to your house and tell you to do more. I'm going to be your friend first. Is how you go about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and it's funny. She had been in this congregation a long time, like her whole life. Like she actually wasn't raised either. She had a bad childhood too. Her parents gave her and her siblings up for adoption when they were very young. And so she was raised by a distant relative and she got abused by them. Like she got sexually abused by her uncle. And so she was traumatized by that still. And she's now like in her late 60s when I'm meeting her. And she was still telling me how affected she was by her childhood. And so she got the truth later in life. Like I think she was in her 30s. Yeah. And her husband became a witness with her as well. And they had two kids. Her kids never became witnesses though. And she was telling me all about her dysfunctional family. Basically, her daughters both have addictions, but she continues to talk to them, like even though it wasn't doing her any good. Like I've never been close to someone with an addiction, but I just could tell like this is just causing drama to you. Like why you're not going to be able to have a relationship with someone like that. It's what I tried to kind of tell her. Like this isn't healthy.
It's like trying to have a relationship with someone who's addicted to the truth, someone who has this thing that dominates their entire life and that makes all their decisions for them and that they'll do anything for and sell anybody out for because it's everything to them. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Her justification was, oh, they're my kids. I can't stop talking to my kids. I'm like, okay, I don't have kids, so I can't
Good for her
empathize.
for wanting to still love her kids and not shun them, at least. Because
Yeah,
shame is addiction fuel. So she's shaming them. It's gonna light up even more. I mean, she could have made it even worse. Well, of course, I guess I don't know who she was around her kids either. She may have been around them and been shaming them to come back to Jehovah the whole time or something. So I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah. And she also told me about the corruption in this congregation in the past. It was terrible. No witness had ever told me stories like this before. like, I thought we're not supposed to share this information or even speak about it. And yet she was divulging it all to me. And like, wow. Like, I didn't know. That's the first time I heard about corruption in the organization.
What do you mean by corruption? Are you just talking about, you know?
Like elders misusing their power and responsibilities. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that happens a lot.
Getting away with stuff just because they're elders.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
A lot that goes on behind the scenes.
So none of those elders though were here anymore. I didn't have a face to put to them.
Sure.
Fortunately. Yeah. But yeah, so this sister was definitely different. I was getting a whole different perspective from her. But she listened to me and my whole childhood, and she was very empathetic, and she was like so strongly against abuse. And she brought out things about the organization, like their tolerance of abuse. And she picked out things in the watchtowers that she didn't think was right. She's like, oh, they're telling this woman to stay with her husband and just tolerate it. And so she was actually the first witness to tell me all these faults that she finds. Like, and at first, I didn't listen. Great. I didn't let myself process it. Like, oh, well, like we're supposed to just ignore this stuff, basically. But I did spend a lot of time with her because I didn't want to be at home with the other sister. And Sister C as well, there's a man in her building she would hang out with. She claimed they were only friends. She would go over and have dinner with him most nights. Eventually she introduced me to him. He was a guy her age, like in their late 60s. I'm like, oh yeah, it's just a friend. She like totally convinced me that she was not sleeping with him. Like, I never accused her of it. I never asked her if she was. She was immediately on the defense about it. So I'm like, yeah, well, that's none of my business what you do with your associates and stuff. Like, you don't need to defend yourself to me. Yeah, so it never bothered me that she hung out really with him. But she would be seen in public with him, and other people in the congregation would complain about it. Yeah. And she would then say to me, well, because she was self-conscious about it. And she'd be like, oh, well, what's wrong with me being out with another man? Just because he's not a witness. I'm like, I don't know. As long as you're not sleeping with him, I don't see what the big deal is. So she always had him as some time went on. And he helped her out too. Like, she didn't have a license, like a driver's license. So he would take her and shopping and stuff. And I always offered it to her, like, I'll take you shopping, Sister C. I'll take you shopping. But she never took up my offer. I helped her out a lot though, like going out and getting her things, like her prescriptions. I did do some grocery shopping for her. But she didn't spiritually progress because of being friends with me, which I was okay with, I was just happy to have her for support, So I'm going to fast forward to, I was now eligible to apply to the School of Evangelizers. So I did. I applied and I got denied the first time. And you had to wait like a year to apply again. So I did. And I was denied again. And yet the organization was encouraging people to apply there. I'm like, well, why are they turning people down after encouraging us to apply? And they said, the letter in response said that we need more brothers. to come, not sisters. Like, wow, again, that's like a blow to me. Like, I'm not good enough is the feeling it gave me.
That's what they're
Yeah.
telling you.
Yeah. It's almost sexist. Like, I understand
Yeah, the organization is extremely sexist.
I understand they only want men to take certain roles, but it definitely doesn't put sisters in a good spot.
Oh no.
No. So I kind of like gave up hope of going to that school and being assigned somewhere, because something that also stumbled me was that there was such a need in our congregation for more elders. Like, our elders were seniors, and they weren't, some of them weren't mentally capable really of the role they had, and only one or two of them like were younger. And same with the speakers for our Sunday morning talks, the same speakers all the time, because there's only so many congregations in our circuit, and they're all up here in Northern Ontario. And every congregation up here has the same problem with their elder body. There's not enough of the elders, and they're old. And I would say, like, 10 years from now, there's not going to be any Jehovah's Witnesses left up here, because they're all elderly people. There was no young people. And I was hoping to find a brother to marry up here, and there wasn't any at all. And I'm like, I would hear from friends down in the city saying, like, oh, my congregation now has 18 elders. I'm like, what? Your congregation has 18 elders, and their motivation is to serve, and yet nobody will come up here to help out? It doesn't make sense. Like, they're putting their comfort living down there before their spiritual things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really upset me. Like, because when you get the same speakers all the time, sometimes the speaker wouldn't show up because for whatever, and we'd have a pre-recorded talk to listen to, and there's only so many, and we would get them repeated. And so
that is brutal. Wait a minute, a pre-recorded talk, so you just sit there and like listen through the speaker as it's played in audio format?
there was actually a video. We had a pull down projector to watch it on.
Oh, you had like a virtual person giving it because you had a projector. Wow, that's got to be awful to do over and over again. Wow.
So I didn't feel spiritually nourished after a few years being there. Like, I really, I was getting discouraged, because this organization isn't all I thought it was. And the people in it weren't as spiritually motivated as I thought they were. So I started losing joy in pioneering. And something good happened. COVID occurred. We weren't going to go out anymore in the ministry. Like, this is perfect. I needed this break from doing the door-to-door ministry. I was actually glad. And so now we're writing letters and phone witnessing. And that meant I was sitting at home with this sister doing that every day. And again, like, because this is a new way of witnessing, she wanted confirmation from the elders that every little thing she was doing was right. And she actually got counseled about it, like trying to do things perfectly and asking for approval too much. Yeah.
I mean, they set that up, but yeah,
Yeah.
they there's actually a concept of learned helplessness. As Jehovah's Witnesses, you were taught to be helpless, to look for every decision. You had to have it okayed by an elder, or you had to go to jw.org and make sure that you were in line with present truth. There had to be some verification that you were on the right path all the time. And so for a lot of people, they just stopped being able to think for themselves at all. It's like, I need to go to somebody. I'm helpless, and I've learned how to be that way.
Right.
Sounds like she was.
Yeah. Well, she too, like, I don't know. I think from her being disfellowshipped, she felt a deficit. Like she had to make up for it.
Oh yeah, the shame. Yeah. Got double down now.
Like one time we had an elder, two elders come over for the regular visit, which this congregation was very bad on. Like the elders are supposed to visit each person once, like every 2 years or something. And these visits weren't happening hardly. We had to actually like request one if we wanted one. And so they came and they did both me and her separately in our apartment. I got the same visit. And afterward, she like expressed to me how relieved she was that one of the elders told her she's doing really well and this and that. And like, I didn't say this, but I thought like, you shouldn't need an elder to tell you that. You should just know that within yourself that you're doing the best you can. Like, that's how I felt. Like you must be really insecure, you know?
Oh yeah, most witnesses are insecure. We were taught to look to others for our validation, that other people would tell us if we were okay or not. Yes.
So
That's common.
it, I didn't like that about her. And I noticed too, she was kind of nosy. She was the type that if she thought somebody was doing something wrong in the congregation, she would report it to the elders, even if she didn't have evidence for it. She would just say, "Oh, I saw this happen, and maybe this is what's going on," kind of thing. And I didn't like that either. I'm like, you shouldn't report anything until you have evidence.
Oh, what good does evidence do? I mean, as you've seen, it's the hearsay that gets more play than the evidence.
Yeah, and I think it was all just part of getting the elders to favor her kind of thing, you know?
Wanted attention, probably.
Yeah. I knew I had to be careful around her.
So you were talking a minute ago about COVID and how it ended up being of assistance. Now, Sister C was clearly now going to be asking other people for, or was it Sister C who was asking, or was this the other person?
My roommate.
Oh, your roommate. So was going to the elders constantly for confirmation of things. So how did COVID, obviously it gave you the break because you weren't going door to door anymore, but how did it start to help you other than
Well,
that?
it was a change of pace for sure. And I didn't have to talk to people face to face. I liked that.
Mhm.
The sister I was living with too, she was getting pioneer hours. She made sure she got 70 hours a month. Like she was, even though she wasn't a pioneer, she wasn't qualified yet.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a bit extreme too, that she was so hard on herself
Mhm.
that way. So just being able to write letters was different. Like I liked how we were able to formulate our own message in our letter. It wasn't the organization telling us what to write.
Mhm.
Whereas in the ministry, it was pretty rigid.
Yeah, presentation.
Yeah. And yeah, so it was harder to get the hours though that way. Yeah, it felt like a longer day to get the hours in. But
I can only imagine sitting there writing letters all day. That seems boring as can be.
yeah, and the organization actually said pioneers don't have to get their hours anymore at this time.
Mhm.
I'm like, well, you can't in my opinion, if you don't have to get 70 hours, then why label people as pioneers anymore?
Also,
That
should
was,
you be saving all the people in this time of the end? COVID's going to kill us all. It's going to be Armageddon. We got to save everybody. So, shouldn't you be encouraging people to do more instead of do less?
yeah. But I was relieved I don't have the pressure of getting 70 hours anymore. Yeah. But the meetings being on the Zoom were not as stimulating either.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had poor speakers in our congregation too. So it kind of just meant my spiritual feeding just went down. So spiritually, I wasn't as strong anymore. And I had to help out almost everybody in the congregation to get set up on Zoom for the meetings. Like none of these are all elderly people, and I'm the only young person. And I was like the only person helping everybody. So I was busy doing that. It was a lot of patience required.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming. I still did it though. And especially Sister C, she especially had a hard time understanding what to do. Like you'd repeat the same thing to her, like do this, do that, do that. And I even wrote it down for her, and she couldn't follow instructions. So I required extra patience with her. But it's funny, a lot of these elderly ones were at the meetings more now because it was on Zoom. They didn't miss meetings anymore. So I still went, even though we were told not to go and see each other, like I still spent time with Sister C. And she was still seeing this guy, which I was used to. And then one day I did a phone call for the territory, and I got a man, and I spoke to him, and he agreed for me to call him back and talk again. So I did about a few return visits with him, and I got him to agree to a Bible study. And I started the Bible Teach book with him. And after we would do a Bible study session, we would end up just talking about general stuff. And eventually it just increased and it got more personal between me and him. And like I enjoyed it. Like it was refreshing to talk to a man in that kind of way, you know?
Sure.
Like, and he was closer in my age. He wasn't elderly. So technically I was supposed to give that over to a brother, but I was enjoying it too much that I kept it to myself. And I thought, well, this is just over the phone, so it should be okay. I knew it wasn't though. And I did tell some sisters in the congregation, and some of them listened in on the Bible study, like participated as a 3-way phone call, including Sister C. So one day I was down in the area with another sister visiting. Me and another sister drove to visit another sister for an outside visit. And I thought, the guy I've been talking to on the phone lives just not far away, because he told me where he lives. And I asked the sister, hey, do you want to come with me and we'll go meet him? So we did. That was all cool. And I actually arranged to hang out with him again. And I brought Sister C with me this next time. And this is summer. It's summertime, so we can be outside. So the Sister C came with me, and she was supportive of it. And he was suffering from a car accident. He was physically injured, his back and his neck. He needed disc replacements. So he was in a lot of pain, and he had stopped working. He was off on sick leave. And he didn't tell me that right away. He kind of tried to hide that from me, but once I started physically hanging out with him, it became evident. Like I could see his physical struggle he was having. And I felt really bad, and I felt really a lot of compassion for him because he didn't have a mom. His mom had died.
Mm-hmm.
And just his family overall wasn't supportive of him. And he didn't have friends that were supportive either. So I was being his friend. So eventually, a sister pressured me to hand this over to our brother, the study. I didn't tell anyone, and I wanted Sister C to keep it a secret that I was actually, I wanted her to keep it to herself that I was hanging out with him. Just like I kept it to myself that she was hanging out with her guy. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I asked a couple brothers if they wanted to study with him. They all said they didn't have the availability. So I had to tell an elder and get him to find someone. It took him almost 2 months to find a brother. And this man I was studying with, he's very intelligent. He actually had intelligent arguments to make over what we were discussing in the Bible Teach book and the Bible. So I told the elder, I'm like, don't just get any brother to study with him. You need someone who can challenge his arguments. They really have to know their stuff. Because even he got me on some arguments where our organization didn't have any answer to his argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So eventually he got handed over, and Sister C, like she only came with me that one time, but I still told her, I kept her up to date with me and him, our dealings. Then one day after I did service in the morning, an elder called me. He's like, "Oh, can we meet on the phone or over Zoom with you, Catherine? Someone's expressed concern." So I met with them on Zoom, and they asked me about seeing someone. I'm like, yeah. And like I told them like that he was struggling with with physical injuries, and he needs support. Like he was depressed, and I had compassion. Like there was no way. Like they want me to stop talking to him, right? And so I agreed to stop talking to him, but in my heart, I'm like, I can't just leave him. Like that wouldn't be the loving thing to do. Like I wasn't romantically involved with him. We were just hanging out. Like, and I was so refreshed to have someone young to do outdoor activities with. Whereas in our congregation, nobody's young to do that stuff with. And I found it so refreshing just to go fishing, you know? So I'm like, there's nothing wrong with going fishing with another man. But so I told the elders I wasn't going to talk to him anymore. And I told him too, like what was going on. He didn't think that was right, that I'm being told not to talk to him. So I did continue to. And one time it was now winter, and I was going to go ice fishing with him. And I didn't tell Sister C what I was doing. But I texted her and told her I'm not going to be available for a couple of days, because she would normally text me or call me every day. And she's like, "Are you hanging out with so-and-so? You're going to end up having fornication, right?" And I just said to her, "Well, I don't see the difference between what I'm doing and what you're doing." And she didn't like that. She didn't.
Well, we're not
I don't
supposed to
know.
look at what she's doing. We're supposed to look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was no cell service where we were ice fishing, and we spent the night in the ice hut. So when we got back to town the next day or whenever, and I got cell service again, I had a voicemail from an elder saying, "We need to talk to you." So I met again with the elders, and yeah, again, are you hanging out with so and so? And they didn't know who he was or anything. They didn't know anything about him. But again, they took away my pioneering, which I was fine with anyway, because I wasn't enjoying the ministry anymore. I felt it was more of a Christian thing to help support this man who was suffering than doing Joe's Witness stuff at this point. Like, this is benefiting him more than calling up people on the phone is, or meeting with people in the congregation. I'm benefiting this man more than all these other activities we do in the organization. That's how I felt. And they couldn't care less, the elders, about what he was going through, what his suffering was. I'm like, this is really against what Jesus taught. What did Jesus do? The illustration of that man who brought in the Bible and took care of him.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what it was called. The illustration is called. But the whole point is Jesus helped people who are suffering. And I felt I was demonstrating Christ-like qualities by being compassionate with him. And I was helping him with a lot of stuff too, to deal with his being off work and paperwork.
Jesus had helped in the Bible, helped lots of people who had different physical ailments, right? Or you could say, leave the 99 sheep and go find the one, or what. Like, a lot of ways you could reason around that Jehovah's Witnesses weren't being very Christian in those ways.
Yep. And I went to call and text her to talk to her, because I knew, I was pretty sure she was someone who has been reporting me, but she avoided me. She didn't answer her phone or respond to my text. So I went to her apartment building and managed to find her face to face, and she reluctantly admitted to reporting me. And I'm like, what about the procedure? You're supposed to give me a chance to talk to the elders myself first, right? Like, that's another thing that made me mad, was this procedure wasn't being followed, and the elders were still calling me. Like, so you just go by hearsay information? A person in the congregation can just call up an elder and say, "Hey, I think someone's doing such and such. Okay, we're going to look into it." Like, you have no basis.
That's how it works.
Like, you have no basis for causing concern. Like, that's what frustrated me. And the elder should have said, "Hey, Sister C, did you talk to Catherine first and ask her to approach us? And otherwise you'll report her?" That's what they should have said to her. Like, wow, like, what kind of, again, this is a down point for the organization. And I'm really I don't know. And my male friend here that I'm hanging out with was pointing out to me, like, this friend of yours is a rat. You shouldn't be hanging out. You shouldn't be friends with someone like that. And of course, I didn't really see it that way. I'm like, well, the organization encourages us to rat each other out, basically. She thinks she's doing a loving thing. She has good intention, is what I kind of said. But then I told an elder that was dealing with me, like, you guys know that she's hanging out with someone too, right? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, you guys see her out in public with him. She claims she's not sexually involved with him, But if you're going to give me such a hard time for hanging out with someone, then you got to do the same, or else it's a double standard. Yeah.
And how did they like you pointing that out?
They're like, oh, we're not talking about her.
Mhm.
We're not here to talk about her. But they did call her and ask her about it, and she lied. She lied to them about it, about being involved with him.
Of course.
Yeah. So I did keep seeing this man, and I did feel afraid of getting caught, because I did start sleeping over. We still weren't sexually involved, but I was spending a lot of time with him. And me and the sister I was roommates with, we had each got our own apartment. So once that happened, I started having him over at my place, and he would actually sit and watch the meeting with me. I'd have my camera off, of course, but because the phone service here where he was living wasn't good to listen to the meetings on. So I said, well, come in, let's watch the meeting with me at my place. And again, like, he had arguments that I didn't have an answer for. Things like about the Adam and Eve account. He's like, Jehovah set them up by giving them free will. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that. I'm like, well, he's like, well, they obviously weren't perfect if they could have free will and make mistakes. I'm like, huh. I
There
had to
never
ponder
been
that one.
sin or mistakes before. Why even have the tree in the garden in the first place?
Yeah.
Why do we even have to specify that it's free will? Because everyone would just do the right thing. There was no sin. So why the concepts and why the execution there?
Yeah. And another thing was he's like, where's the evidence from the Old Testament that some of these events took place? Like Solomon's temple, there has to be something out there from Solomon's temple to prove it existed. And same with like the Noah's Ark, all these big events in the Bible. He's like, is there any evidence that they occurred? And I think I did some research, and not really. There isn't. So he set me down a path of doubt. One time he directly said to me, oh, when I was defending the Bible, he's like, open your eyes, Catherine. And from that moment on, I started looking into things more. I went online. I went to that website that's very familiar, JW something.
JWFacts.com?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went on JW Facts. I learned that the date Jerusalem fell was, the organization was the only one saying that date. So what I learned on there put me into more doubt. And it took a while, but eventually I didn't believe it was the truth anymore. It was a combination of stuff. And my friendship with Sister C, like, I was still friends with her, but I wasn't telling her anything about this man, my involvement with this man. She tried to get it out of me, but I wouldn't tell her because I knew she would run to the elders with it. I started to, like, this man I was seeing was on medication for his pain, and he was using marijuana for his pain. And she was criticizing him for that. Like that he was selling his drugs and that he was selling his marijuana. And I'm like, no, he's not selling those. Like, why would you think that? And she was telling me not to hang out with him, of course, and because he was actually taking time away that I would be spending with her. I gave her so much of my time, and now I was spending it with him, and I I was having fun where she was at an age now where she's 70 years old and she can't do the things that I'm doing. So I think there was some jealousy involved. And it's funny, then she asked me like, would your friend give me some of his pills or some of his marijuana or sell me some? She wanted him to sell it to her. Like, again, he does not
So
sell it.
She's gone from accusing him in a negative, judgmental way of selling stuff to, hey, can I buy some?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? I think she was testing the waters with those accusations, trying to see, is maybe he maybe, and if he does, can I get some?
But I also gathered that because she started telling me some traits of people with addiction. He was saying he's addicted to his medication. And I'm like, no, he doesn't have those traits that you're telling me. And I went home and I looked up online myself, traits of an addict. And she herself has those traits. And I figured out she's abusing her prescription medication she's on. I knew what medication she was
A lot
taking.
of witnesses abuse alcohol and medications.
So everything clicked about her behavior and stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, I'm like, you're the addict, Sister C. I'm like, I didn't say that to her, of course. I just decided I'm not going to be friends with her anymore. She is such a hypocrite. Like, I was so upset, like, that I was being treated like this. And just the hypocrisy. And what's funny too is she ended up getting COVID while I was still friends with her. She was hospitalized. She almost died. And this man she was seeing stopped seeing her. He stopped being friends with her, whatever they were doing. And Sister C was really upset about it. Like, there was a lot of times during her friendship with him that her feelings were hurt, or she was upset that he didn't include her, like as if she was his wife. I'm like, well, you're not in a relationship with him. Why are you so sensitive about him including you and stuff in that, you know? And so when she got COVID and he cut ties with her, she said to me, she's like, I think he's not being involved with me anymore because he's not getting any sex. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense if you weren't having sex in the first place. So I think she didn't realize what she disclosed there, but I still didn't. I didn't go to the elders with it or anything. I was done, you know, with the drama. So the elders had met with me a couple more times, and finally, after I did commit fornication, I told them, I told the elders, yes, I've done this, and so I said, you can go ahead and disfellowship me, because at that point I didn't believe it was the truth anymore anyway. And one of the elders that was on that meeting, there has to be 3 elders, I believe, when they're gonna do that. Because the elder that was overseeing my service group, he didn't communicate with us at all, whereas other elders of their service group were having regular communication with their group and being encouraging and stuff, and very generous. Some elders were even like making baked goods with their wife and giving it to the people in their group, and just being good friends, basically. But my overseer wasn't doing anything like that at all. So this elder who was being good and generous asked, he's like, Catherine, is there anything that could have been done differently that wouldn't have led to this happening? And I did mention that I was very lonely, and that's kind of what led to this, was loneliness. And that reminds me that something I learned during COVID too was that it's more detrimental to your health to be lonely than it is smoking. Being lonely damages your health more than smoking does. So I'm like, well, the organization forbids smoking, and yet they think it's okay to be lonely. They'd rather you be lonely than form a friendship with someone outside the organization. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So that was another check against the organization for me, that they would rather me be lonely. Like, so I was happy to be disfellowshipped. And since then I felt very free and a lot more balanced.
So you ended up getting disfellowshipped. I guess after that, so have you been shunned by everybody, or is there anybody who still keeps in touch?
Yeah, everyone shunned me, of course. We weren't, I got to fellowship January of 2022. So we weren't back at the meetings yet. They actually went back to the meetings that April. So I was glad I didn't ever go back to a meeting.
Didn't have to go back to the Kingdom Hall.
Yeah.
And uh, is there anything that you would say to the people who shun you? If you had something if you had opportunity to say it, is there something you would want to say?
I would tell them to be honest with yourself and ask yourself if there was evidence that proved that this is not the truth, would you listen to it? Would you allow yourself to be proved wrong? And if not, then you're willing to live a lie.
That's
And you're not being honest.
that's a great point. I mean, it's one of those questions, right? If you ask one of Jehovah's Witnesses, is there anything I could show you that would change your mind? Is there anything I could show you that flew in the face of what you held to be true, that you would actually allow yourself to take on and get curious about and start to reflect on? And most Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't want to lose their beliefs. They want to believe in this thing.
Yeah.
They're stuck. They want to believe in it. And if they want to, then there's nothing you can do. They don't want to see anything else. They're not open to it. They're closed.
Well, they've led their life by it all this time. So for them to learn it was all a farce, like,
It's hard.
that'd be hard to face.
It
Yeah.
is. And then you have sunk costs, the sunk cost fallacy. Put so much into this. How can I possibly leave it now?
Exactly.
And so they just continue to go down that same path, and it's creates all the, I mean, as you've been talking, I've just been thinking about all these different people that, not just you, but these different sisters and such, all these people, maybe even David to some degree, all these people who've grown up in dysfunctional homes and in families that are just, there's no love, and they're looking for love in all the wrong places. That they're out there trying to find it in this group dynamic, but none of them have ever learned how to love themselves. None of them have been able to figure out who they are, and to start with a good sense of self, and then to find other people who vibe with who you are. And instead it's, well, let me see if I can change myself to vibe with this cult, this organization, or this group of people. How can I change who I am to make myself who they want me to be, instead of how can I just be me and attract the people who like me for who I am? And that's a whole different dynamic. So it's just really sad to hear, there's so much pain here. And then it's just the pain is kind of amplified because you're given this fake family that you think is real and that feels real to some degree inside the organization. And then you realize that eventually, if you're not who they want you to be, it all goes away.
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
sad.
there's lots of layers to how you're shaped in this organization.
Yeah.
Like, and it goes down to your basic human needs. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It runs deep. Um, what kind of helped you? So you say you did some like JW facts helped you. Um, so over time, then you were able to break down the beliefs and to start to see through them and that it wasn't the truth. That's a hard process too, isn't it?
Yeah. And I listened to your podcast, and it helped a lot, especially like you would point things out to people and give a different perspective on what occurred. I'm like, oh, it was a perspective I'd never thought of before. And it's definitely a process. I called it like a mental detox.
Yes.
And just to have a different perspective on really what went down and what they're teaching. Because really it's not direct. These things that are really flawed, they're kind of hidden. Like, it's very indirect the way they operate with their abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Yes. It's
and
psychological.
after my experience with Sister C, I'm like, I just thought like you'd rather have people like her in the congregation than people like me, because I was honest about my fornication. So I got this fellowship, but someone who's willing to lie about it, you'll keep in the organization. Okay, I don't want to be part of something like that.
Yeah. I agree. And unfortunately, there are lots of people who are still in there who are doing things and treating people poorly, and they turn a blind eye to a lot of things. But so you were disfellowshipped, you said in January of 2022.
Yeah,
So then at this point, you've been out for just over a year. So how do you like your new life? What do you enjoy about life outside of Watchtower?
over 2 years. No,
Oh yeah, 2 years. I can do math. We're in 2024 now, not 2023.
so
Yeah, so over 2 years. So what do you enjoy about your 2 years outside of Watchtower?
I'm still with this man. Yeah, I'm very happy with him. We ended up going to Germany to get his discs done. He had to pay for that out of his pocket.
Sure.
Yeah, because in Canada, don't ever envy our healthcare system here in Canada. It's it's nothing. We're very unhappy with it right now.
That can't be. That's the American utopia, Catherine. We all aspire to be like America's hat, Canada, and and to have your healthcare system. Yeah, I'm not gonna get into but I've talked to enough Canadians. I know that although certainly there are some things that I'm sure are nice. Nothing is all or nothing. We don't live in an all or nothing black and white binary world. I'm sure there's some things about your system that are certainly better than here in America, but there are many other different ways there are many problems with yours too.
Yes. So
Otherwise, there wouldn't be Canadians who come to America for help at times.
right. So that he went for surgery December of 2022.
Okay.
So I was so glad that I could go and have a free conscience, because he was wanting to go back when I was still a witness. When I met him, he he was just waiting to have the money to go. And he asked me, like, would you go with me? Because I need someone to go with me. I'm like, at that point, I said, no, I would get in trouble with the elders if I went with you. But so the timing worked out that I could give him my full support going to Germany to help him. It was, he had a total of 5 discs done, 2 in his neck,
Ooh.
3 in his lower back. Yeah. It was very intense. He was in a lot of pain afterward.
Did you have to stay in Germany for a long time?
No, we only stayed for 22 days.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering, like, how long, as someone who has lower disc issues, and someday will perhaps have to have some sort of surgery. Yeah, I've just researched it. I know it's not all, it's a rough thing to have done, and it's not always an easy recovery.
Yeah, he's still in recovery. He's a lot more mobile than he was, but he
Good.
still has pain, and nerve pain is what he's got.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I'm glad I can support him fully now that I'm not a witness. And because he never pressured me to leave the witnesses. He's like, do what you want, you know. But I've also I'm going to college. I'm taking electrical engineering.
Oh, check you out. Good. That's cool.
So I'm getting myself a career, and we're thinking about having a family too. It's a tough decision these days. Like back when I was witness, I was not having kids, no way. But now I do think it's a possibility. Yeah, I just worry about what the future would hold for them in this world.
Well, certainly there are things in this world that are less than ideal. And uh, certainly it can be scary, but like we grew up. You didn't grow up in it, but we were in a doomsday cult, and so we are kind of given, or we can be given toward catastrophizing a little bit, because we were made to see things a certain way, and so it's kind of, the world will go on, people will live lives, you can find happiness in many different ways of living. I don't know what things will look like in 100 years, but all we can do is really live and enjoy our days. It's always the world is always ending.
Yeah,
So
so we're trying to make the best of it.
yeah,
And
that's all you can
yeah,
do. That's all you can do. Not you nor I can control what happens going forward to a large degree, but we can, be the change we want to see in the world, or help, take it one day at a time and learn to enjoy some things,
my
relaxing and
family,
enjoying things.
my family certainly was happy that I got out of it.
I bet.
And I could participate again in Christmas and stuff. But like my family, like we can all be in the same house now and be
Mhm.
civil, of course. Now we're in our 30s. Uh, I'd say we're pretty good. Not there was never. Oh yeah, that's another thing is I was still hurting from my mom's behavior in the past.
Sure.
And a few years ago, I asked her on the phone. I'm like, "Were you ever abused when you were young?" She's like, "No. Why?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm just trying to figure out why you didn't want to be close to me." So she ended the call when I said that. And but eventually she came around and talked to me about it. And this was just, I'd say, in 2020. She finally was willing to open up and talk about what occurred. Because Because when I became a witness and I was taught that you have to forgive others if you want to be forgiven, I made a great effort to apply that towards my mom. And I did for the most part. You can forgive someone, but I don't think you can heal. I couldn't heal until she was willing to talk about it, you know? And,
It
and
certainly helps. You don't have to have that, but certainly, yeah, that's a very healing thing when it sounds like your mom was finally not just willing but able maybe
yeah,
to have some conversations. That's a beautiful thing to add to your healing process.
yeah. So my relationship with my mom now is really good.
Good
And
for her.
yeah, we're close now. We have the relationship I always wanted us to have. Yeah.
Well, I mean, check you out. Here you are, future electrical engineer, with somebody who loves you enough that they don't care, even if you wanted to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. They just love you for you. And I'm glad to hear that you've had some healing. It sounds like even in your family, and all of that was outside of Jehovah's Witnesses. How about that?
Yeah.
And I hope you go have the family that you've always wanted, and um, control the controllables, have the life that you can have, make the best of what the days that you have, and just live a long, happy life with people who actually love you.
Yeah. That's sounds a lot better to me than waiting for some Armageddon or paradise that's never gonna occur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go make your own.